Welcome to the Deer Society podcast. Here's your host, Brian Lemke.
Yeah, this is who I am. Well, I'm a deer hunting man.
Well, hey everybody, thanks for tuning in. Welcome back to the Deer Society podcast. I'm Brian Lemke, joined by JJ and Mike Dukart, and special guest today back in the studio, Mr. Joe Miles. How you doing, Joe?
Good, buddy. How about you?
Doing awesome, man. Today we are talking late season, so we're going to be covering some late season gear, late season tactics. The rut is behind us now, so we're talking what do you do when those cold temps here in Minnesota. Now, we're also going to be talking about some different areas of the United States. South Carolina, your home. Definitely a little different than here in Minnesota in the winter. So we're going to talk about, are those tactics the same? Are they different? But late season is what we're talking about. So, here in Minnesota, late season can be a really great time to hunt. Those success percentages can go back up because you start getting deer back on those feed patterns. They have to recover from the rut. They're really keying in on those food sources. You got a standing bean field here in Minnesota, cold temps, snow. Things are looking good for you. But Joe, South Carolina, in your experience, what does late season look like for you guys down there?
Yeah, in our area, we go all the way to January 1st, Georgia a little bit later than that. And we just don't get the real cold temperatures, obviously, that you guys get up here. So we don't see them finishing up the rut and a huge transition into late season feeding. We kind of see a continuation, especially on these properties that are so messed up buck to doe ratios where it's 17, 18, even sometimes 20 does per buck. The rut keeps going. I mean, I had a picture, in August, in September of a fawn that still had spots. So when was that doe bred, right? I mean, it was a 3-week-old fawn in the 1st of September. So, it's an August-born fawn. Up here, if that happened, the fawn would never make it. So it's completely different. I will say when we do get an ice storm or, we get some 20-degree mornings, the deer, in my experience, that in South Carolina, when that happens, because they're not accustomed to that, it freaks them out. Everybody thinks, oh, my God, I got to go get on my food plot. It's going to be 20 degrees and icy tomorrow morning. What I have seen when that happens, they hunker down for a day or two. They don't feed it. It freaks them out because they've never really. A lot of the younger deer haven't experienced that in their lifetime. So what I have found that works is not to rush out there right away. To wait until those temperatures are about to switch back the other way, or give it 24, 48 hours for them to, get incredibly hungry and have to get up and feed. Whereas here, I think when those temperatures plummet, the deer are used to it and they get out right away and hit those beans, and it's pretty patternable. So that's, I think, the big difference between, in the South and up here.
Yeah, I'll comment on that a little bit. That's really what you described is very similar from the cold thing. Is very similar to what's happening up here. As far as the rut piece goes, it's nothing like it, okay? Like you said, because the fawns won't survive. So we're very predictable when it comes to the breeding season and the cold coming in and the fact that they have to get that food in order just to survive. So the bucks themselves have to survive that winter because they've run themselves down. We talked about earlier in the podcast that they're in the JJ calls it the steroid stage where they're just eating and staying close and putting all that high energy and getting really fat and building their muscle up. Well, they do that because the winter will kill them if they don't, because they're running them deer. So it's a survival thing. So it's been consistent that way. As far as the cold weather goes, it's a relevant type of cold weather. So you're saying, okay, it gets down to 20, the deer hunker down, blah, 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 blah. But up here, when it's 20, they'll go out and feed, and that's correct. But if you look at our cold snap is 20, 30 below or 10 below or something with that, 30, 40 below wind chills. And so when we get that cold, which would be something similar to year 20, the deer do the exact same thing.
It's relative.
They lock down. They'll sit there for days after a blizzard. And as soon as that warm front, that southern wind comes in and things calm down, boom. It's extremely predictable. And JJ we learned that, JJ. And you even predicted it. There was one of the biggest deer we've taken at the Deer Society here in Minnesota, and I'll leave that story to you because it was your deer. But
well, yeah, I think what you guys are talking about, that first big cold, I was just gonna say, feel like that's the shocker, whether it's down there or up here. That's what kind of shocks the system, makes them hunker down, and then all the other cold snaps after that, it seems like they're used to it and they. They're ready for it, and they're not going to hunker down quite as hard unless it's a big blizzard.
Yeah,
where we got 2, 3, 4, 5 feet of snow coming in. That's a different ball game
cold,
too.
yeah.
But
My kind of weather.
Yeah, kind of like down where you are. Snow over top of the deer's back.
Oh yeah, happens all the time.
Blazing trails through there. Yeah, but Curly's a good example, and it's something that we kind of picked up off of. You watch the juries, and they really got that whole weather thing, locked down where. After the cold front, big south wind, we've talked about it before, heavy south wind, that warm up, that's when they actually get up and move. And that's when we took advantage of the curly hunt and, that warm up. Because I was trying to hunt that deer 2 days in a row during the cold front, just sitting there with, 3 feet of a layering system on me. I didn't have the Asio at the time. So trying to stay warm, froze my butt off and nothing moved. And then the warm up came, switched strategies a little bit. And then all the deer got up and moved. And if you haven't watched the curly hunt, you just got to go watch it.
You got to go watch a curly hunt now. And, like JJ said, that it gets cold up here. We have consistent cold fronts moving in, and they call them Alberta clippers, and they come in from a certain area consistently. And so our wind directions are kind of predictable, if you will. And that's so like when that switches back to that south wind, like JJ was talking about. But if you're on the coast or something, that might be an east wind. That might be because the weather conditions are different in different parts of the country. So my point was, don't say it has to be a south wind. That may not be the case. It may be a warm
west
breeze off the ocean or west or east or whatever.
Even
it might
an
be.
east,
But,
once the front comes through and you get that east wind, that can be deadly.
Well, when I'm out in the field and I'm freezing cold for a couple of days, north wind, and it warms up and, it feels good, I want to get out and move a little bit too. So, if I want to be out there and moving, maybe that's...
to really drive home the relevancy of the temperature thing is in Minnesota here, when it gets super cold like that, we're out clearing snow. We don't just hunker down in here. We got a lot of work to do. So I'm out all day long in, 20, 30 below type stuff, moving snow so that we can get things functioning again. And we're out there working. We're in that cold for long periods of time. So we get used to that over January and into February. And if we get a warm-up day, that gets up to 35 to 40 degrees, we're literally walking around with a sweatshirt on. That's like almost summer. It feels like summer
great
to us, where if you're down, in Florida or something, you'd be freezing. You'd be bundled up with scarves and face masks and, so the deer have that same quality too. They have that metabolism that's been built into them. For centuries. And the same thing up in Canada. The deer up there are even different than the deer here. And we got some pretty hardy deer, so.
So JJ, I want to kind of ask you, what are you looking for when you're going out and hunting? Obviously you're watching the weather, and that's such a key thing late season. Are you where are your cameras at late season? Are you moving them from those spots that you originally had them in, those kind of rut spots or post-rut spots? And are you relying on that camera intel as much, or are you looking at the weather, or is it a combination of both?
Honestly, the cameras are going to stay in a pretty similar spot, which is I like to put them on the scrapes, primary scrapes or scrapes, and just transitions into that heavy food, that standing corn, standing beans. So it's kind of in the same spot we were watching during that post rut, not moving the cameras too much. Definitely watching the weather and trying to time it, whether it's the warm front coming in after the cold or the cold. You can try that too. So just mixing up, watching intel for sure on the cameras. We're focusing on that standing corn, standing beans if you got them, even some of the turnips and brassicas that we planted. The deer seem to be digging those up if the snow's not too deep. I don't know. What kind of food down south do you guys have that like late season? I know you don't get that cold, but what are they craving down there similar to what we see here.
Yeah, so you really, from a natural perspective, we have some big cutovers and stuff where they can still get browse because if that stuff freezes off, it becomes not real palatable to them. But the food plots that they have, the leftover ag, there's not a ton of it, but that is a time that if you do have food plots, you're gonna have most of the deer because the acorns are gone. If we've had some cold snaps and the browse, in those cutovers, and they eat the heck out of the cat briars and all the fruit's done by then too. So a guy that does have good sustainable late season food plots or fall food plots that go on into the spring, they can have a ton of success.
Yeah, another thing about our food up here too is, and JJ didn't touch that one, is that they do eat that corn for that carbohydrate, and there's some protein in there and whatnot. But late season, especially when the rut is like done, because we'll have our rut, it'll go through November, second, third week in November is pretty much done. And then there'll be that gap, and then the unbred does, they'll still be checking stuff. It's actually easy to kill, not easy, but there's a good opportunity to kill big bucks that get off them does during this gap. So toward that end of November, and then it'll pick up again in December, beginning to middle of December, will be kind of that second unbred doe spot. But once that's done and that cold weather really, really hammers in and breeding is completely done, they will get to a point where they have to replenish the muscle. See, I coached hockey for many, many, many years, and what we would see with our players is, because it's such a grinding sport, they would be all muscled up and all, in great shape and everything. And by middle to end of the season, they had wore off not only their fat and their strength, but their muscle starts to deteriorate. So your body eats away your muscle. And that's what's happening with these bucks. So their diet may be different than the does and the fawns. Not that they won't hang around or eat the same food sources, but I've noticed that they'll hit them beans because they need that extra protein to get that muscle up. So protein's pretty important to them in the late recovery part of the season. You may not even be able to hunt at that time. A lot of those times we're looking for where we're going to find the sheds. But if you had standing beans that survived in the snow and they could get to it, you'll find 100 deer out there.
I think when it comes down to it here in the Midwest, upper Midwest, when we get to that late season stage and you have snow and cold and, standing bean field, standing corn, standing food source is always your money go-to spots that time of year. But there's other food sources out there as well that I don't know if they get overlooked, but you can enhance your property by doing some of these things. Let's take hinge cutting, for example. And you can talk about this from the Whitetails from Scratch property, or you too, Mike. But, when Andy Orr came up here and has done a lot of designing on your guys' farm with you, one of the most important changes that you guys made was putting these hinge cuts in certain areas of your farm and creating cover, but also creating a food source throughout the year and throughout that late season time, because woody browse is a huge food source for those deer at this time as well. So JJ, I don't know if you want to talk about that on the Whitetails from Scratch farm specifically, and some of the hinge cuts that you guys have put in and seen success or lots of deer that time of year.
Yeah, so it's been a few years now that Andy cut the one section we call Cedar Springs. A lot of hinge cutting in there. It got real thick. We see a lot of regrowth, and then the deer are just nipping all those buds throughout pretty much the whole winter, everything that they can reach. Eating there. Now the west side, we've never done any cutting or timber work, but after the season closes, we do have Scott Baker. Joe knows him.
Yeah.
Wild man, big buck killer.
For sure.
He's going to log the property on the west side. So coming into the next few years, we're going to have a lot of regrowth there. So hopefully now we have kind of a full system, because the west side's always been real open, but good ag and some good features and stuff. East side does have a lot of that, late season browse and woody browse. So, just trying to add more of that. It's hard to keep up with that, just like it is hard to keep up with, having enough standing soybeans or corn. They just mow that stuff down. They eat the woody browse pretty heavy too. And throughout a winter, when snow starts to build up, it's almost like the deer just keep standing on a higher platform and eating more and more and more as that builds up. And when we go shed hunting, pretty much everything's browsed off at that point. So we're going to add more on the west side with some logging and hopefully just kind of bring everything together.
And I've studied that in my backyard. I mean, I have a little mini food plot back there. It's a non-hunting area. It's just an urban type deal. But we do hunt deer not far from that area. Anyway, so it's good for me. I can just look out the back window and see what they do in these cold weathers. And I know I've told this story before, but if you haven't heard it, when we get that super cold Arctic blast, them deer will lay down in those pine needle beds. And even though there's snow on the ground, they just like that area. And they'll sit there all day long at 20, 30 below, and they won't move. And once in a great while, you'll see them just kind of like push up their front legs and just kind of stretch their muscles, almost slow motion, and then they'll just lay back down again and kind of close their eyes and just kind of sit there. And the only thing they're doing from a food perspective during that cold snap is exactly what JJ explained. They'll stand up and they'll nibble on a little bit of that woody browse, and then they just go lay right back down again. And they don't travel more than 10 to 20 yards. I mean, it's crazy to watch that unfold. But they'll shut that entire metabolism down, almost like a hibernation type of a state during those types of conditions, and that's how they survive. Now, I don't know what's happening down south, I don't think they're getting, I'm not going to speculate, maybe you can help me out, but I can't imagine them being at a point where...
No, we just don't get that extreme. I mean, we have bucks that are breeding does, like I touched on earlier, all the way into January. I mean, the rut's still, is still fumbling around, and it's no real clear cut defined season, and we never get extreme like that. But and that's just amazing to me that they can even survive.
Yeah, it is. It's crazy.
So how do your strategies change, or do they change at all? Like, so you we talked about this back, you were getting ready to go home in October for the rut, early October. So now, we fast forward to December.
Mm-hmm.
How do your hunting tactics or strategies change? Are you still relying on camera intel? Are you using those same strategies that you were kind of using back then in early October, or have they changed a little bit?
Yeah, so I guess look at it twofold. One being the Midwest. I've got a good bit of experience late season, Kansas, Illinois, Ohio. So my strategy there is obviously the late season beans and stuff. I'll run my cameras different then. I'll normally, if I haven't tagged out, which is my fault, obviously, but late season, not to get all over the place, but early season, rut, and late season are the best times to kill a particular big deer. But what I will do with my cameras, I will get away from the text cameras late season, starting December 1st in those particular states, depending on where I'm hunting, and get on the food source, whether it be the beans or whatever they're going to be hitting in the area that I've got access to hunt. And I will get a traditional SD card camera and get it on plot watcher mode. And I'll set it for the afternoon so I can see the entire plot and just let those things bake for a while and then come in. And then, those little Moultries have a really good plot watcher mode, and you play it like a video, and it takes a picture every minute. And you can set those things from like 4 p.m. to 7 p.m. And it takes a picture every minute of that entire plot. And then you can go and watch like a week worth of that. And not only do you see what's coming out there, but you can see where they're coming out. And then if you have any type of wind log whatsoever, you can see what wind, they were using to get into that field. Because that, in the end, that's the challenge. Late season seems simple, right? It seems, okay, they got to hit the food. It's cold. It's fish in a barrel, but it's still not. I mean, there's a couple. Wind is obviously really important. Access is really important. And then even more importantly is your exit strategy, right? How are you got 500 deer in the field. How am I getting out of here? Right. So, and the solution to that, there's not a great way to do it. You can ninja out of there, which is probably the worst possible thing to do, but you have to get out of the stand. You can have a buddy or farmer, wife, friend come in and bump for you, meaning come in and drive in and push the deer out with a car, whatever it may be. Some unique things I've heard, guys blowing coyote calls, trying to clear the field with that. I'm not a huge fan of that, but I kind of like somebody coming in with that, particular, whatever it may be, truck, 4-wheeler, SUV, and get bump the field, clear it. Some other things, I think Bill Winkie was a guy that used a remote control car. He had a remote control car, and I might have the wrong guy here, but there was a guy that would have a remote control car that would, once it got dark, it had lights on it, and he would send it out into the field and run it around, and it would clear the field, and he was able to get out. And then there was another guy that basically all the year he would run a tractor around the perimeter of his property at early morning when you would be going out to hunt and late evening when you would be going out to hunt. And he would have a tractor come out and pick him up out of his stand. Now everybody, obviously doesn't have that, but just unique things that guys do to clear those fields, because that is going to be your toughest thing. Getting in is going to be okay because you can beat them to the field as long as you know the wind, but that's something you really have to strategize about. And personally, in a perfect storm, I would want to be in kind of the transition area of where they're coming from that bedding and that super cold. A lot of times they'll group up. Yeah. They'll group back up, and so they're all coming from the same area to that late season food source. And if there's any way to get in to an area where they funnel out to that, and then you don't have to worry about being on top of them in the food, and you're able to use a funnel again to your advantage. So that's kind of, I guess, the late season tactic for Midwest. At home, it really doesn't change. The stuff that I'm doing now, obviously food is important, and a lot of your browse, your acorns are gone. They're not hitting the scrapes as much. The rut is still going on, so there are. I see scrapes in February that are active, and so you can start funneling stuff to the food sources that are still there. But it's not a huge transition of changing everything up like I would do in the Midwest, in the South.
Interesting. I like the concept of the plot watcher thing. That's interesting. We rely on camera intel so much, and when you have a camera set on a big field like that, it's really difficult because you have to have a deer that walks right in front of that camera. When you have a big standing bean field, it's hard. So that brings up a good point with just camera placement, and trying to get it in those high travel areas, where you're going to get the most success or the best chance of a deer walking in front of there that you want to see. But that's a hard thing. I know, there's lots of different cameras out there from the reveal side of things. One cool thing that they've done here just recently is introduce the Pro Extra program, which allows you now to trigger that camera, remotely, even if a deer's not in front of it. So it's not giving you that full gamut and perspective over a long period of time, but I think that it does help you a little bit, being able to half hour before dark I can trigger that camera, and if it's in the right spot it will show me that whole plot and give me a little better idea. So but yeah, I mean camera intel is, I think, super important that time of year, but camera placement is really important there as well.
I'll climb 15 feet up in a tree and put a camera that's on a plot watcher mode, so you can literally see the whole. Or I'll send Kevin 15 feet up there. Yeah. Up, way up in the tree, so you can see the entire plot and just let that thing bake for a week, especially if we got any kind of cold front or anything like that. And that's been really helpful.
Yeah, I know time's always a precious thing, but do you ever, and you travel a lot, so when you're hunting, you probably don't have, unlimited days at a certain spot. Do you ever late season use up some days just scouting, trying to stay out of there? Just glassing, not relying on your trail camera, and then waiting, and then, day 3, 4 going in, or is it always?
Absolutely right. Just across the board now, I've actually sat in a stand 3 afternoons and a 4th afternoon for an hour because the wind started swirling, so I got down and climbed out. But our season opened August 15th, and I've sat I've had 3 full hunts or afternoon hunts. And late season, but I'm working you talk about working. I mean, every single Saturday, Sunday, I am, basically all day moving cameras, transitioning stuff, pulling stands, whatever it may be, based on that camera intel. But a prime example of glassing and not hunting late season in Kansas, there's a big property that's way out in the prairie, and it has one big like 2 mile draw that I have access to hunt, and I can park on a big hill. There's not a lot of ag around there, but it's a real good transition area, and I can park on a big hill and see that whole valley. And 3 afternoons, that's all I did was sit up in my truck, because I'm a mile and a half away, and just glass that entire thing just to see if I can see where one gets up or moves through or whatever. And so, yeah, I spend a lot of time, doing that. And the same thing, I mean, if you don't have plot watcher mode on cameras or whatever, that's not your deal, certainly fine. I mean, you can revisit the early season tactics of glassing. Absolutely. Hit multiple food sources, in the afternoons without going in and burning it up. I think, we talked about this earlier back when we were doing this in October, but stacking the deck, right? Stacking the odds and trying to have a high percentage sit. And if you're like, okay, here's a bean field, it's late season, I'm going to bust in there, hang my stand, and get to hunting. Well, you're way better off glassing or running a camera and figuring out exactly what's going on, so it's a high percentage sit. Because late season, as we all know, when you booger a big one, it changes things big time.
Absolutely. I can remember Adam Hayes talking a lot about scout more than you hunt. I know he's a big believer in that, and that's true. I mean, you want the highest percentage chance that you can get when you're going out there after deer, especially if you're going after some of those upper age class, upper echelon deer. I was talking to somebody just the other day, and they made the comment, well, you must hunt a ton, or you guys must hunt a ton. It was a general term, and it was like, you know what? I really don't hunt that much. Like, I don't sit in the tree that many times a year, but I can tell you, chances are that if I'm going to sit in the tree, I truly believe that there is a good chance that I'm going to kill a deer. And I tell my wife that. She doesn't believe me. But, when I go out and sit in the tree, I'm going out to do it for a reason, because I think there's a chance that I could kill a deer that I'm after. You know what I mean? Do you have the same way or same feeling?
Yeah, and I was going to touch on that a little bit in a previous podcast and kind of forgot. But yeah, so I used to hunt, and I used 25 days straight, I think it was, in October and November.
Crazy.
It was like, I was just took so much pride into like, 25 days in a row, I could just hunt every day, but, and then the more I hunted and the more I had not the results I wanted, it was like, okay, we got to change something up here. And we started listening to, talking with the Rod Whites and the Adam Hayes and, the whole progression of all the different guys at Deer Society, bringing input and bouncing ideas off each other. And, that's when you start to fine tune things and really, let's pick some days where you got high odds, where you actually feel like you're going to kill a big deer, not just hunt to grind it out and think that, hours equal success, because that's not going to happen.
Because it may not be prime time, but you got that one certain buck that's doing something, and that's that window too. So it's not just all about, the moon and the weather and the barometer and the food and all that. It has to do with behavior too. And so with that being said, I'm listening to all of you guys, and this is what we do. This is how you learn, We're all learning from each other as we're talking here. And just some of the specific tips from around this area that I picked up on in the winter, because now my brain was back there and I'm thinking about what Joe is saying, and all this stuff. It's like you can literally visual see deer pattern with no deer around in Minnesota in the winter because of the trails. You can see what they're actually doing without actually, because it's there visually. You can just see it. This is the trail they're coming in on. This is where they're going out. This is where the field's stamped down. It's just those little tiny things. And also, so my brain is there, if I want to set a camera or if I want to set a stand or whatever. But the other thing you really got to consider, especially when he's talking about getting in and out of the stands, is it's super cold, and it's usually not, and I shouldn't say usually not windy, but when it's not windy and it's super cold, it's almost like an amplification of sound. And so you get a warm up, then you get a cold snap, and there's no fresh snow, and you're walking out there, and it's just like crack, crunch, crack. And I mean, it's brutal because you just don't even want to walk because it's so loud. And the same thing, you get to your stand and you grab the handle of the thing, and all of a sudden you hear this, because that cold weather makes that stuff squeak. And those little tips, can really help you, and keep that in mind when you're going out for your hunting strategy. Another one is the squeaking. How do we fix that, JJ? We'd fix it with friction tape. We call it the old hockey tape. So that's one way you fix it. As far as
Or you buy good gear.
Yeah, exactly, good gear. Lube
We
it
got
up.
a lot of cheap stands that were.
Yeah, but we've lubed them up too with Vaseline. Vaseline is a non-odorless type of lubrication. If you needed to do something like that, you could do that. I wouldn't go up there with WD-40 or penetrating oil. I mean, it's going to smell. So you got to be smart about that. But if some of the funnest hunts I've had is fresh snow, because you're like a freaking ghost, man. It's like you're whispering out there. And if you wear that white camo, you disappear. You know what I mean? You get a little winter camo on and you hunt from the ground. Those are some of the funnest hunts that we've ever had. Because you start
Doe
to get
patrol. That's typically the doe patrol.
Yeah, it's the doe patrol.
management
You know, we
time,
get
yeah.
out there and we challenge ourselves. Well, I'm going to sit on a white 5-gallon pail in my white suit on a fence line, and I'm going to kill a deer off the ground. And we do it every year, you know. That's kind of our challenge, you know. I'm still waiting on one where I can be filmed and all of a sudden just reach out and just pop, smack one on the back.
Counting coup.
Make sure you're filming that for sure.
Yeah.
I got one thing, just seasonal related, and then I would like to, and I know you were just about to jump in, but then I would like to jump into gear a little bit with Joe, but I was just curious. I'm going to lay an observation out. Maybe you and Mike can give your opinion for Minnesota, and then we'll throw it to Joe and see if it's the same there. But as far as seasonal, like core bucks or non-core bucks, you know, you got your early season bachelor groups, and then you get that pre-rut and rut October, November here where you see your core bucks kind of come back. They take the area over, and then you got your rut bucks, which kind of, you know, come in and out for a day or two here. Those are new bucks that we don't see a lot. And then as we transition post-rut into what we call late season, it seems like the core bucks really stick around, and those are the ones that you really see more consistently through, you know, end of November through December and then into January. And then there's also a really late season here where it seems like the new bucks come in. So it's extremely cold. You know, maybe it's even into January now. The food sources are limited, and now you're pulling in deer from long ways off, and maybe deer you never seen before. So
That's a
you
good
got deer in
point.
the summer and then like late season that are not the same deer as your typical, you know, core mid-season bucks. Is that what you see, Brian? Is that something that you would agree with for where you hunt?
Yeah, for sure. I think that, you know, it's interesting. We were just having a conversation. Adam was in here for a minute, and, you know, he's obviously, you know, trying to shoot his first buck this year. And, you know, we talk about some of these deer that I know there's a high percentage of him, you know, he's not tagged out if he's tagged out, but if he's still got a tag, you know, that late season time, that there will be a certain group of bucks there. And I know this because they've been there the last 2 years, 3 years in the winter, and they become regular there on our food sources. Those are the core bucks. But every single year it happens in December, you have bucks show up and you're like, you've been running cameras all year and you're like, what are these deer? You know, where did they come from? And that's just it. Like, you know, we have the benefit on some of our farms because we've worked so hard to do it, to have that food there for them late season, right? It doesn't just get like there's a lot of work that goes into strategy, planning, and planting that creates those food sources late. But those food sources don't exist everywhere. So when it's that cold here in Minnesota, these deer, they're smart. Especially these older deer, they've lived long enough to figure out that they need to get somewhere where they have good cover and the best food. You know, that's what they're going to do. So that's a great time to see some of these other bucks that show up late season that you've never seen before, because they've been through it. They're smart enough to understand that, hey, I'm going to go and find the best opportunity to survive. And if you have those good food sources, then yeah, it's a great time to see new bucks on your farm.
Do you agree with that? And then how does that relate to down south where the obviously temperatures aren't extreme? The food doesn't pull them in like that drastically.
You do see a shift when you get into after the acorns are gone. When you get a couple frost, a lot of the cut over browse is gone. These manicured farms that have lots of late season, they have kind of fall food plots in there, you will see a migration of deer into those properties. So that, and I think it's imprinting. You know, these deer know about that. They know where these farms are, and you know, they're creatures of their belly, right? I mean, they're going to go where they can get some food, and a lot of these, you know, we call them plantations, if you will, or hunting farms. That's what they are. And the ones that are real manicured and really taken well care of, you know, they can have a kind of a timber lease next door that is just corn piles and you know, timber stands of 2,000 acres. And then you've got this manicured hunting farm next to it, and those deer will absolutely move out of there, you know, because the food is limited and they know it's there. And so guys that are lucky enough to have places like that, I mean, as long as the key, I think, is to keep the food in there every year. You know, don't miss a year, because those deer learn that, and they'll be there.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Let's transition into gear a little bit. So I don't care where you are in the country, cold is cold is cold. So obviously Minnesota, there's no debating that we get cold up here, right? But down south, it's relative. You guys still get cold down there.
Yeah.
Now, it's not the same type of cold, but you guys are used to and have adapted to a different temperature, right? So, you know, when it's cold, sometimes the hardest challenge of hunting in cold weather is being able to sit out there, spend time in the tree, and stay warm. And not only stay warm, but to the extent of, okay, can you be effective when that shot presents itself, right? So, you know, we've all worn a lot of different late season gear, tried different tactics to stay warm. Joe, you guys have really put a lot of effort into creating a full whitetail system that is comfortable and effective, and also cost effective for whitetail hunters. So I want to pick your brain on Asio's late season gear, and you know, just tell me about it. We're obviously excited to try it out. I made the comment a while back in a podcast that you know, just like even the Asio's mid stuff, the Sherpa line stuff, the mid-season gear is super warm. And I wore that a lot of the beginning of December here last year. You know, now when it gets that super, super cold, nasty stuff here, definitely going to want to jump into that late season gear. But walk me through kind of that system and that lineup of late season gear.
Yeah, well, first off, you guys are tough because you understand what cold is. We really don't down south, but in developing the line, the late season line, I was super sensitive to it, right? Because I get cold. You know, and what's cold to me is not going to be cold for you guys. And so, but I've had the experience of hunting in insanely cold, maybe not 20 below, but, you know, -10, -12 degrees. And that's cold, you know, for us and for the majority of the population. That's cold weather.
Well, just to clarify, at 20, 30 below, we're watching football. We're not sitting in a stand.
Yeah, I wouldn't think so. Are you watching the Vikings beat up on some people? There's three keys to cold weather gear, and you guys will know this better than anybody being here. It's got to be, you mentioned this earlier, it's got to be super, super quiet. Because when you get those still days, when it's bitter cold, anything you do, they can hear. So it has to be incredibly quiet. You have to have a really good insulation layer inside of it to retain your heat. And then it has to be windproof. If it's not a windproof item, I don't care if you've got on 35 layers of clothing. If you don't have a windproof, some type of laminate windproof barrier, you're going to get cold.
You will.
So we knew all those three things had to happen. So we went through fabric after fabric after fabric, and we settled on a brushed fleece outer fabric that's really, really quiet, and it took our camo pattern really well. So it showed really well. Then we've got, it's not proprietary, but it's kind of exclusive to us. There's a big difference in the laminate, the windproof laminate. A lot of them, if you get clothing and it's windproof, if you move it and crinkle it, it makes a crinkling noise and it's loud. So we tested a ton of them, and our PU laminate is probably the quietest windproof laminate on the market. If you get other companies' products and feel them and squish them around and all that, you're going to see a difference with our stuff. And then the best insulation that we found is Primaloft. And there's different layers of Primaloft. Just because it says Primaloft on the package, if it's not the Primaloft Gold, that's the absolute highest level. And it's lighter. It retains body heat better. It's a more expensive insulation, obviously, because of that. And so we've got in the core areas, that you need to retain your heat, we've got 180 grams of Primaloft insulation inside there. And then it kind of maps out when you get to your extremities so that you still have plenty of dexterity. You're able to climb, draw your bow, and that sort of thing. Some of the features, if you will, being whitetail hunters and having whitetail hunted for 30 years, late season is the time you have to be real cognizant of the cold. So, like our bibs, for example, our late season bibs, we have complete two-way zippers from the top of the hip all the way to the feet. So as walking in, you get extremely hot, and then you sweat if you're wearing this stuff, and then that's when you freeze, right? Yeah. You sweat and you get insanely cold. So we have heat dumps on our bibs. So you can put your base layers on, you can put your bibs on, your boots on, everything on. Put your big heavy jacket on your pack. The Asio pack has compression straps where you can hook the jacket right up to it. You go into your stand with these things unzipped. It's letting all your heat out. Climb up in the stand with your pack. Sit down, calm down for a minute. When things start to settle, then you can zip those things down. It retains all your heat. Dump your jacket on top of it. And buddy, negative temperatures with that system, you're going to stay super warm.
Yeah, I just relived decades of crazy cold and hunting as you're going through this process of discussing, of describing all that stuff. And, this is stupid, but when I was growing up, we literally, and this is no joke, we'd put Wonder Bread bags in our boots to keep our feet dry. There was zero technology. We'd have, if you watch that, I think it's A Christmas Story, that little kid that got bundled up into the big ball and he couldn't walk. We did that. So learning and progressing with being warm in cold weather, that's been my entire life experience. And so as we progress through hunting and sitting out there and experiencing these brutal, and you won't hunt. You're not going to want to hunt if you're not comfortable. I'm just going to tell you that. You get out there in the morning in a Minnesota day, and it's not even bad, but before that sun comes up, and you're sitting there, and you're just shaking. You know what I mean? You're like, oh, come on, sun, come on, and you just suck it up. It's almost like Naked and Afraid. You're sitting out there, and you're just waiting for that to get up in that sun. Then you'll kind of lean away from the tree and let the sun hit you, and you're like, oh my God, that feels so good. So if you've ever experienced that kind of stuff, and I know many, many people have, whether you're down south or up north, it's almost impossible to hunt that way. And we've also been in a situation where you were going to sit and stubborn and you knew you had a good chance, and it was so cold and you sat there for so long without moving, you don't realize your muscles are tensing up. You can't even get the bow pulled back. Literally, you can't. And you're just like, oh, and your brain can't figure out what's going on. And so, every now and then you have to do a little stretch and maybe pull the bow back during your times. That's the kind of cold we're talking about. And that really, really affects your hunt. Now let's add to that. Let's add the bulk. Okay. Shooting your bow in the bulk with stiff muscles is completely different than when you were shooting your bow before the season started. It's a different animal, completely different game. And so to have the right gear and to have, and what I've learned is that wind is probably, I'm going to rank it up there around 80% of what you absolutely have to have just to start the process of being comfortable. Okay. And then the problem with that is, like Joe just mentioned, is the sound and the noise during that time of year is brutal. So if you have something that big, well, then it's bulk, it's thick, and you're sweating like a pig. You are sweating because you got all that extra heavy stuff your body's not used to on the clothing part. It's super thick. And if you're not, you need to be able to vent that so that you don't break into a wet sweat, which is going to freeze you again, once you slow down. So this is real stuff. And, if you have the right gear, and I'm excited to try this, and mentally I've progressed through all these decades and experienced all this stuff, from playing hockey in the middle of winter to broom ball and all that kind of stuff, to hunting and ice fishing. And you need to get into footwear too, because that's the big one. I guess now my only real solution to that is I get them heat pads. Now the problem with that is your feet will sweat. So now you have to make sure that, and I phase up. I put lotion on my feet. I put the phase lotion in my armpits and stuff where I know I'm going to sweat, in your crotch area. All that areas, bald guys sweat on their heads. So you're always putting the phase foamer on your head, But that's just so, all that is so extremely important. And it's not just 10, 20 below. It's the first cold of the year. Like we're coming up on it this 2 days from, well, I shouldn't say exactly when we're going to get the first cold of the year. But anyway, it's the first cold of the year when you go out there is, even if it's 30 or if it's 29 and you're out there in the morning, that feels just as cold as 10 below if you're already acclimated to the cold during the late season. You know what I'm saying? But we don't usually hunt 10 belows, why don't you talk about that a little, Jay? When would you hunt up here during the cold late season?
Well, yeah, I was just going to touch on kind of that transition from cold to colder to coldest.
Yeah,
exactly. I haven't quite gotten into the late season gear yet. I can extend the midweight Sherpa line stuff for quite a long time. Add some extra layers and stuff, but definitely jumping into the late season here pretty quick. I'm thinking about throwing bibs on first. Getting that core with the mid-season jacket.
Yep.
Until it gets extremely cold, then going to the big,
Yep.
the big jacket. And I kind of do that early season too, going from, lightweight to adding maybe a middleweight. And you kind of just work. Like if you look at the forecast throughout the season, it's 2 degrees colder than yesterday. Oh, I was like almost cold yesterday.
Right.
Okay, I'm going to make the switch now. So you kind of work the system. I don't know if that's how you do it too.
But 100%. That's why we built it like that.
And
everything can be
windy
layered
that day? Is it sunny that day? All those things make a big difference. Yeah. And you can mix match the different, like JJ was saying, you don't have to wear all cold weather gear,
Be gradual with it, because
exactly.
you don't want to just take that next step, get super hot. It's only 1 degree colder, and then you're out there sweating. So you got to take that,
I'll wear our lightweight early season hoodie, the synthetic that dries so fast. If I've got a long walk, I'll have my bibs on, unzipped all the way down, and just that lightweight hoodie. And I'll have everything else in my pack. And I'll pack in, if I've got a mile walk, you obviously got the big boots on and all that, and you're going to be, no matter what you do, you're going to be sweaty when you get there. And that shirt dries so fast, and then I'll layer on top of that, and then climb up and get after it.
Yeah, and then you get the vest, which is an extra windbreak on top of your windbreak jacket, so you get kind of a double up in the core there. So you can extend and really shift things around, with minimal changes and not take big steps from one thing to the next. So we got the whole system, so we're working that, but just about time to get into the late season.
Yeah, I want to comment
gear.
on that you're going to sweat no matter what thing. And that's the reason, well, obviously, Joe, you created this system of clothing because of the cold, and there's a purpose and a reason for that. Well, we did the exact same thing with the phase system. You know what I mean? And so, yeah, you're going to sweat. But if you use the entire phase system the way it's designed, it's exactly designed to do what you do with your cold and with your clothing. So the phase system breaks down into different phases because, one, you want your body to be neutralized so that you wash it. And then, like I said, I pump that lotion all the time. You put that lotion on, and now it's actually kind of penetrating your skin. So you're getting the neutralization technology as you start to sweat. Okay, so you're neutralizing it as you break some of that sweat. Well, then you add on the clothing piece of it. And now anything that once you dry off, that's also getting neutralized as it filters through the clothing. So you're not releasing that big alarm human odors, those human odor molecules. That just turns the deer inside out. You know, it used to be back in the day, if you broke a wet sweat, you're done. That's a kiss of death. Well, that's not the case anymore with these good systems of clothing and these good systems like PhaZe are out there now. And then, of course, that last one is you always have your wipes or your foamer. Maybe I spoke soon on the wipes, but they're going to be there. But the foamer, and that's that last, once you get in your stand and you do the cooling down, anything exposed, anything you can get to where you got a wet sweat, go ahead and neutralize that again. So you can get away with overheating now if you have the right stuff.
Yeah, and the way we do our scent control, our base layers, if we're touching our skin with that and you break a sweat, or even just, we typically swap base layers fast because the skin cells and the bacteria grow up.
I do probably every other hunt I'm switching.
But the exterior stuff, unless you break a sweat to where it's going to go through your first liner into your outer gear, you should be pretty good, like airing that stuff out again, putting it back in your bin, but, keeping that fresh. I like to keep it outside the exterior Asio Gear, but just keeping those base layers clean, using the ventilation system like Joe said along the bibs, and making sure you're walk slow, try not to sweat. Yep. But we're consistently washing our gear, and foam's always part of the system when you get to the stand, even when it's 10 degrees and you're like, do I really want to be wet right now? Yeah, it's probably worth it. You take a little bath, but a lot of technologies to use, keep the wicking materials, the phase system, just it all works. It's all designed for a reason. So yeah.
And you said the fibers in the Asio actually has a antimicrobial element to it too. So that's gonna, and that those two technologies with the phase and those don't work against each other.
Yeah. I mean, just to hit on scent control real quick, anything you can do to help that. I mean, that's the number one defense, right? They smell. And I never, I hear guys say, I just hunt the wind. I just hunt the wind. It's absolutely fine. And we all hunt the wind, right? But anything you can do to prevent the maximum amount of human odor, you're either, you don't want to pay for it or you're lazy. Those would be the only two reasons that you wouldn't do it if you're serious about hunting. I mean, scent control is so important because deer smell humans in hunting areas often. When they encounter a smell, and I've talked to some bloodhound guys and some guys that track humans and their dogs, and you can learn a lot from that. The animal, the bloodhound, the deer, whatever it may be, they get the smell and then they have to make a decision. Okay, is that enough that I'm going to freak out and haul? Get out of here. The tracking dog, is that fresh enough for me to follow? The deer, the same thing. If you've minimized your scent, that deer has to make a decision. Am I going to keep going or am I going to blow out of here? And if you've done nothing and he gets your scent, the chances of him blowing out are huge. The chances of him making a decision and possibly coming on by are greater if you've done everything in your power to minimize your human odor. Another thing, we talk about the rut, and we talked about this earlier about only sitting, high percentage sits. Obviously, during the rut, you're going to sit all day, every day. So just clear that up. That's something that you just got to grind through. But those funnels, don't think for a minute that a 5, 6, 7-year-old buck is not going to follow a yearling doe, right?
That's fact.
They're going to follow a yearling doe for sure. They want to breed every doe they can breed. If you can get that yearling doe by you, who's not nearly as switched on to human odor, as a more mature deer, again, that stacks it in your favor. If you can get that yearling doe by you, if she's coming in downwind and you get her by you, and then you have an opportunity to shoot that buck, it's worth it to do everything in your power to be as scent free as you possibly can. So that's my take on the whole scent control stuff is, man, phase up, wash your stuff, be super anal about it. And it's a grind and it's a work. Don't take shortcuts. Be a professional and do it the way it's supposed to be done.
Yeah, and I like the analogy of the intensity of the odor being given off. Now, obviously, my thought process on that is the type of smell that they get. You can get away with a foreign odor if it's not identified as a human. I've done it many times, you know, where the deer will pick up and I'm like, well, what's that? What's that? What's that? And then they go on and no big deal because it wasn't the human. And also, if you ever hunted urban areas, you know what I mean, where there's houses by and the deer live in those areas and that kind of thing, in which we hunt plenty of that, they can be more tolerant of the human, but they can identify the intensity immediately. And they know what's dangerous and what isn't dangerous. And it could be almost the same distance where somebody's in their yard, you know, goofing around, or the kids are playing, or whatever the case might be. And I've been in this situation, and I watched deer walk down through a draw. There's no visual there, but they can hear the kids probably 100, 200 yards away. And I'm, you know, much closer to that deer, but it didn't bother him. But I guarantee you, me being closer to him, if I would have stunk or had that wet sweat, that deer would have just flipped out. Even if I was 300 yards away and he caught that scent, he would have flipped out. And I think there's also types of scent in, you know, based on where you are with your emotion. I mean, we talked about that a little bit, that the tracking dogs are not necessarily looking for the blood. They're looking for this adrenaline release that happens. So like when a deer comes in close to you, you know, and all of a sudden the heart starts pumping and the adrenaline starts kicking, sometimes they can just kind of like sense, like, you know, something's doesn't seem right. And all of a sudden they walk away from you with the tree there, and you know dang well they didn't see you, you know. So those are just perceptions and things that, you know, yeah, like you say, you got to do everything you possibly can, just like Joe said.
Yeah, that was the podcast with Jeremy, who's, you know, lives and breathes all things dogs with Dog Bone and Hodag. Yeah, tracking dogs can locate a wounded deer or a deer that's been hit because of their adrenaline levels, and they're dropping off dander cells.
Is that what it is? Dander cells?
So that's why we're
it's
trying
not like a pheromone type thing.
That's why our foam and our lotion, we're really trying to seal ourselves into and remove the bacteria, because, you know, deer are tracking us, right?
Everything.
Everything you can do.
But well, we're shifting into the late season gear. We're going to shoot our bows a little bit with that before we hit the stand. Maybe this next week.
Yeah, one more thing that I want to touch on late season gear wise, and it's you guys at Asio, you have the neck gaiter, right? The Sherpa line neck gaiter, and I think that's something that is so underrated. I've never been a neck gaiter guy, and you know, I'll wear a lightweight one or try to cover my face and, you know, some scent concealment stuff. But like for cold weather, I've never been a big neck gaiter guy, and I can remember last year, it was in November. And we had a cold front kind of push through when we were in the stand, and it was that damp cold. You know, it wasn't 10 degrees, but it was just that snap where it was damp cold, and you're like, man, I'm cold. And I had that Sherpa line beanie or gaiter in my pack, and I remember I put that thing on, and man, I will not go to the tree without that thing when there's any kind of cold weather now, just because the difference that it made covering up, you know, just that little section of your neck and kind of pulling it up on your head, the heat that kept in. I mean, it literally changed the whole dynamic of my feeling out there. So like the neck gaiter, you know, keeping some warmth in there, and then obviously the Asio one, man, was a game changer that day, and something that I won't go to the field without from now on.
Neck gaiters are like my best friend. They first they seal in the odor and all that heat, like you said. You know, it's like that sealing spot on your gear where if you didn't have that, your collar's open and you're going like that, you can basically smell your own body.
Yeah.
So it's sealing you off, keeping you warm. And if I don't have that, I start to do like a bad posture thing.
Yeah.
And I get in the tree, and by the end of the season, my back is absolutely wrecked. So that neck gaiter saves my back even. It's crazy.
Yeah, keeping your head and neck area warm is super important.
Yeah, and I learned that, you know, going through that process of the Wonder Bed bag, you know, the first time anybody ever came up with like a neck thing, we used to put the scarves on, you know, which I sucked, so nobody ever wore them. But when they come out with them neck things, you know, the first time I ever wore it out skiing, it was like, oh my God, this is the thing. So I've been wearing them for 30, 40 years, but the technology's got so much better. And then as I aged and lost my hair on top, I noticed immediately, like all the heat in your body is released like a chimney through your neck and your head. You know what I mean? And if you can seal that down, it's going to keep your core warmer. I don't think people maybe might not make that connection, but as a guy who's been through this for as long as I have and with a bald head, I promise you, you seal off that with that neck gaiter, and then you get that, that head covered, and then you're holding that heat into your core of your body, even if you're not moving and sweating. And, and also if you pull it up and if you need to pull it over your nose, and you can, recycle the warmer air, and that'll keep your core a little bit better as well. So those neck things are like
And you got
essential.
Yeah, and the wind cut on the different materials. Maybe you can talk about the beanie with the fleece and the neck gaiter too.
Yeah, they're both. It's the exact same outer fabric that we use on our bibs and late season jacket, and then it's got the PU laminate to keep the wind out, and then it's lined with the Sherpa fleece. We didn't do an insulation in there because it can get too hot and too bulky in your neck and head area. But again, windproof is the key. And you've got the Sherpa lining in there that keeps it good and warm and it's comfortable. It's not scratchy on your neck. Same with the Sherpa beanie. So there, some thought went into that for sure.
Well, late season can be a super effective time to harvest a big mature buck, and you can start to use some of those early summer feeding patterns again during that late season time frame. Or if you're in the South, maybe you're using some of those same tactics as the rut. But regardless, can be a super effective time. There's lots of good tools out there. Asio, good clothing, PhaZe, scent control. There's lots of good tools out there that can help you increase those odds. So make sure you check them out. Take advantage of them. We're out of time. We're going to jump off, go put our late season gear on, shoot some bows, get ready for the upcoming weeks of hunting. But good luck. Thanks for listening. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you subscribe. If you haven't done so already, download the free Deer Society app. Check out all things there, video, hunt breakdowns. Joe, thanks for joining us. Definitely check out AsioGear.com. That gear hopefully can make you more successful and make you more comfortable this late season. So good luck hunting, and tune in next time.
Well, I'm a deer hunting man. Well, I'm a deer hunting man.
All our sponsors here at Deer Society are partners whose equipment we know we can trust are going to make you more successful and have a better experience in the field. Products like Illusion Systems, maker of the Black Rack, the Extinguisher, and the PhaZe Body Odor System. Tacticam, Reveal Cell Cameras, 10-Point Crossbows, Onyx Maps, Asio Gear, Huiman, and Big Frig.